Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Timothy McDonald, but everyone calls me Tim. I've been a park ranger for 20 years now, and I've seen a lot of strange things in abandoned mines, rusty equipment that shouldn't still be there, old lunch pails left behind when a mine closed. Sometimes I find messages scratched into the walls by miners from 100 years ago. But I never believed in ghosts. Not until the summer of 1977, when I met men who died 25 years earlier but never stopped working their shift. I grew up in these West Virginia hills. My dad was a coal miner, just like his dad before him. I know mines the way some people know their own houses. I can tell you what kind of rock you're looking at just by touching it. I can smell gas buildup before the meters start beeping. And I can walk through a pitch-black tunnel without getting lost. That's why the state hired me to inspect old mines and make them safe. Most of my job is boring, checking support beams, testing air quality, putting up warning signs. But the Beckley Exhibition coal mine was different from the start. The mine had been a real working coal mine until 1962. Then the company shut it down and turned it into a tourist attraction. Families could ride little train cars down into the tunnels while guides told them about the old mining days. It was pretty popular, actually. School groups came through all the time. I'd been to Beckley dozens of times for routine inspections. Everything always checked out fine. The mine was stable, the air was clean, and the tourists loved it. So when the site manager called me on a Tuesday morning in June, I figured it was just another normal checkup. "Tim, we've got a problem," he said. His name was Bill Patterson, and he sounded worried. "The night guards are hearing things." "What kind of things?" I asked. "Mining sounds. Pickaxes hitting coal, cartwheels rolling on tracks, men singing," and I almost laughed. "Bill, those tunnels carry sound funny sometimes. It's probably just water dripping or—" "That's what I thought too," he interrupted. "But it's been happening every night for 2 weeks, always between 11 at night and 7 in the morning. And Tim, one of the guards says he saw lights moving in the sealed sections." That got my attention. The sealed sections were old tunnels that had been closed off years ago. Nobody could get in there, nobody living anyway. "I'll come take a look tonight," I said. I arrived at Beckley just before dark. Bill met me at the entrance along with Walter Hayes, the security guard who'd seen the lights. Walter was a big guy, ex-military, not the type to get spooked easily, but his hands shook a little when he showed me his logbook. "Started June 1st, Walter said, pointing to his notes. 11:15 p.m. Heard sounds like someone working with a pickaxe. Went to investigate, but when I got close, the sound stopped. Could be animals," I suggested. "Raccoons, maybe." Walter shook his head. "I know what animals sound like. This was different, rhythmic, like someone actually working." And then he paused. "Then I heard men singing, an old song my grandfather used to sing, a mining song." "What did you do?" "I got the hell out of there," Walter said flatly. "Came back with my flashlight and my radio. That's when I saw the lights. Down in Tunnel 7, the one that's been sealed since the 50s. Little yellow lights, like old carbide lamps moving along the walls." I looked at Bill. "You got the keys to Tunnel 7? "It's not locked," Bill said. "It's bricked up. Has been for 25 years. We went down into the mine together, just the three of us. The tourist train sat quiet on its tracks. Our footsteps echoed on the wooden platforms. I carried my heavy-duty flashlight and my testing equipment. The air smelled like damp rock and old timber. The main exhibition tunnels looked normal, support beams in good shape. No water damage, no weird smells. We walked deeper past the areas where the tours stopped, into the sections that were just for maintenance access. That's where things got strange. I noticed it first on the walls, fresh scratches in the coal. Not old marks from decades ago, but new ones. Recent ones. I ran my finger along them and came away with black dust. "Bill, I said quietly. When was the last time someone worked down here? Actually worked, I mean. Not just maintenance. 1962, he said. Why? I showed him the marks. This coal dust is fresh. A few days old at most. Bill's face went pale in the flashlight beam. We kept walking. The tunnel got narrower, the ceiling lower. And then we reached Tunnel 7. The entrance was bricked up just like Bill said. Old bricks sealed with concrete. Nobody had been through there in decades, except. At the bottom of the brick wall, right at floor level, there was fresh coal dust. A lot of it. Like someone had been working on the other side, and the dust had seeped through tiny cracks in the old mortar. Walter pointed his flashlight at the dust. That wasn't there yesterday. I check this spot every night. That's new. I knelt down and touched the dust. It was so fresh it was still slightly damp. And when I brought my hand close to my face, I smelled something else mixed with the coal smell, sweat, human sweat, and tobacco smoke. What time is it? I asked. Bill checked his watch. 10:45. Let's wait, I said. If the sounds start at 11:15 like Walter says, we've got half an hour. We sat there in the dark, keeping our flashlights off to save batteries. Nobody talked. The mine was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. At exactly 11:13 p.m., I heard the first sound, tap, tap, tap. The rhythm of a pickaxe hitting coal, coming from the other side of the brick wall. Walter grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. Bill whispered something that might have been a prayer, but I just sat here, listening. The tapping continued, steady, rhythmic, like someone actually working. And then I heard it, the scrape of a coal shovel, the rattle of a metal bucket, and voices, men talking to each other in low voices, too muffled to make out words. I stood up slowly. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to move closer to the wall. I put my ear against the cold bricks. The voices got clearer. Should hit the vein in another hour. Telling you the timber's bad in this section. Just want to finish the shift and get home. They were so clear, so real, not ghostly or echoing or strange, just normal men having a normal conversation about their work. I pulled back from the wall. Do you hear that? Walter nodded. Bill looked like he might throw up. The temperature had dropped. I could see my breath now, white clouds in the flashlight beam. But that didn't make sense. We were deep underground, where the temperature should stay constant. It should be warmer down here, not colder. I checked my thermometer. 52 degrees. It had been 72 degrees just minutes ago. The sounds continued for another hour. Pickaxes and shovels, cartwheels rolling on tracks, men singing. I could make out the words now. An old Irish mining song about going deep into the earth. My grandfather used to sing it. And then, right around midnight, I saw it. A light. Not from our flashlights. This light came from somewhere else. Somewhere impossible. It moved along the tunnel wall to our left, the wall opposite the sealed entrance. A warm, yellow glow, like an old carbide lamp. The light moved slowly, steadily, at about chest height, like someone carrying a lamp down the tunnel. But there was no one there. Just the light, floating in the darkness. Walter made a sound in his throat. Bill grabbed his radio, but I put my hand on his arm. Don't, I whispered. Just watch. Though light moved past us, so close I could have reached out and touched it. The warm glow lit up the tunnel walls, and in that brief moment of illumination, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A shadow on the wall. The shadow of a man wearing a mining helmet, carrying a pickaxe over his shoulder, walking with the tired, heavy steps of someone who'd been working for hours. But there was no man casting that shadow. Just the light and the shadow and the sound of boots on stone. The light continued down the tunnel and disappeared around a corner. The temperature started to rise again. The sounds of working men faded slowly, like they were moving deeper into the mine. By 1 a.m, everything was quiet again. Normal temperature, no lights, no sounds. Just the three of us standing in the dark, trying to process what we'd experienced. "We need to research this mine's history," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the silence. "Every incident, every accident. I want to know what happened in Tunnel 7. Bill nodded. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 hours ago. "There was an explosion back in 1952. I don't know the details, but people died." "How many?" 23 men. They never recovered the bodies." The number hit me hard. 23 men. Still down here somewhere, buried under tons of rock. And apparently still working their shift. We went back to the surface. The night air felt warm compared to the mine's cold. I told Bill and Walter to go home, get some rest. I'd come back tomorrow and start digging through the historical records, but I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about those voices, the shadow on the wall, the careful, steady rhythm of men doing their jobs. The next morning I drove to the County Historical Society. The librarian, an old woman named Mrs. Chen, helped me pull files from 1952, newspaper articles, company records, safety inspection reports. The explosion happened on March 15, 1952, a Friday night during the late shift. The company was rushing to fill a military contract, coal for Navy ships. They were pushing the miners hard, making them work extra hours, cutting corners on safety checks. The gas buildup should have been detected. The ventilation should have been better, but the company wanted that coal, and they wanted it fast. The explosion ripped through Tunnel 7 at 2 in the morning. 23 men died instantly. The tunnel collapsed, sealing them inside. The company said it was too dangerous to try to recover the bodies. They just bricked up the entrance and moved on. I found the list of names: James Peterson, Robert Sullivan, Mike O'Brien, Carlos Ramirez, and near the bottom of the list, Patrick McDonald, my grandfather. I'd known he'd died in a mine accident. My dad never talked about it much, but I didn't know it was this mine. I didn't know he was one of the 23. Mrs. Chen watched my face. "Did you know someone on that list?" "My grandfather," I said quietly. She nodded slowly. "The families tried to get compensation from the company. Harrison Coalfield, Inc. The company fought them in court for years. Eventually paid out small settlements, but nothing close to what those families deserved. A lot of widows and children struggled." I kept reading. The more I learned, the angrier I got. The company knew about the gas buildup. An inspector had filed a report 3 days before the explosion, but the company ordered the miners to keep working anyway. They had a deadline to meet. 23 men died because someone wanted to save money and meet a schedule. That night, I went back to the mine alone. I told Bill I needed to do some measurements, check some equipment. He didn't argue. I don't think he wanted to go back down there anyway. I waited in Tunnel 7 with my recording equipment set up. At 11:15, the sound started again. I recorded everything, the voices, the tools, the singing, and then I did something stupid. I called, "D out." "Hello?" My voice echoed in the tunnel. "Can you hear me?" The sounds stopped. Complete silence. My heart pounded. I'd made a mistake. I should have just stayed quiet and tap. Single tap on the brick wall. Right in front of me. Tap, tap. I knew that rhythm. My grandfather taught it to me when I was a kid. It's an old mining code. 2 taps means yes. Someone on the other side of that wall heard me, and they answered. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my motel room listening to the recordings over and over. The voices were so clear. Men talking about the coal vein, about going home to their families, about being tired. But these men had been dead for 25 years. The next morning, I went back to the Historical Society. Mrs. Chen had pulled more files for me, company memos, safety reports, letters from family members. "There's something else you should see," she said. She laid out a photograph. Black and white, faded with age. 23 men standing in front of the mine entrance. They were dirty, smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. The caption read, "Evening Shift, March 1952. I scanned the faces, and there, third from the left, was my grandfather. Younger than I'd ever seen him in photographs. He was grinning, his mining helmet pushed back on his head. "They took this picture the day before the explosion," Mrs. Chen said softly. I studied the other faces. These weren't just names on a list anymore. These were real people. Men with families. Men who went to work one Friday night and never came home. "Mrs. Chen," I said, "what happened to Harrison Coalfield, the company that owned this mine?" They changed their name in 1965, became Harrison Industries. They're still around, actually. Big energy corporation now. Headquarters in Charleston. Same family? Same family. Richard Harrison III is the current CEO. His grandfather owned Harrison Coalfield back in 1952. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The company that killed my grandfather was still in business, still making money, and they'd never rethought tortillas. Ellie been held accountable. That night I brought more equipment into the mine. I set up cameras, temperature sensors, audio recorders. I wanted hard evidence, something I could show people. Bill and Walter came with me this time. Bill had decided that if ghosts were real, he wanted to see them properly. Walter just wanted to understand what was happening in his mine. We waited in the dark. At 11:15 the sounds started, but this time they were louder, more intense. Like the miners were working harder, faster. The temperature dropped to 45 degrees. Our breath came out in thick clouds. And then the lights appeared. Not just one this time, a dozen lights moving through the tunnels, carbide lamps swinging as invisible miners worked. The shadows on the walls were clearer now. I could see the shapes of men with pickaxes, men pushing coal cars, men working together to load the carts. One shadow moved right past me. So close I felt a cold breeze as it passed. And I heard something, a voice right next to my ear. "Careful of the timber." I jumped back. The voice had been clear, direct, like someone standing next to me. But there was no one there. Walter's camera flashed. He was taking pictures of everything. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said. "I heard it." The working sounds continued. And then around midnight, something new happened. Music. Someone was playing a harmonica, a slow, sad tune. And men were singing along, their voices echoing through the tunnels. In the dark beneath the mountain, where the coal seams run so deep, we dig our way through stone and sorrow, till at last we go to sleep. I knew that song. My grandfather used to sing it. It was an old Irish ballad about miners who died underground. Without thinking, I started singing along. The working sound stopped. Complete silence. And then slowly, one by one, lights appeared in the tunnel ahead of us. 6, 7, 8 carbide lamps, all in a row, like men turning to look at us. Bill grabbed my arm. "Tim, maybe we should—" "Wait," I whispered. One of the lights moved forward, just one, separating from the group. It came closer, slowly, carefully. The shadow on the wall became clearer. A man of medium height, broad shoulders, wearing the old-style mining clothes from the 1950s. The light stopped about 10 feet away from us, and in the glow, I saw him. Not solid, not really there, but visible, like looking at someone through foggy glass. An older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He was looking right at me. I knew that face. I'd seen it in photographs. "Grandpa?" The word came out before I could stop it. The figure nodded slowly. He raised one hand in a gesture I remembered from childhood, his way of saying hello, and then he pointed at me, then pointed down toward the sealed tunnel, then made a gesture like pushing something away. He was trying to tell me something. Walter's camera flashed again. The figure flickered, fading slightly, but didn't disappear. Instead, my grandfather's ghost gestured again, more urgently this time, pointing at the brick wall, then making a braking motion with his hands. "You want us to open the wall?" I asked. 2 taps on the brick. "Yes." "Why? What's in there?" The ghost pointed at himself, then held up both hands, fingers spread. Then did it again. 23 men. "Your bodies," I said. "You want us to find your bodies." 2 taps. "Yes." Bill was shaking now. "Tim, we can't just—" "Wait." I turned back to the ghost. There's more, isn't there? Something else you need. The ghost nodded. He gestured toward the surface, toward the world above, then made a motion like writing. Papers, documents. The company records, I said. You want people to know what really happened. 2 taps. You want justice. 2 taps, harder this time. The brick wall vibrated, and then, all at once, all the lights went out. The temperature returned to normal. The shadows vanished. We were alone again. But on the wall, written in fresh coal dust, were 3 words. Tell the truth. Over the next week, things got worse. The ghost miners appeared every night, and now they were showing up during the day too. Tourist groups started reporting strange experiences. Children saw the dirty men in the tunnels. Women smelled tobacco smoke in areas where smoking had been banned for decades. Men heard voices calling their names. One tour guide quit after seeing a full-body apparition, a miner standing in the middle of Tunnel 3, staring at her with sad eyes. The mine's structural problems increased. Support beams that had been solid for decades suddenly showed signs of stress. Metal rails twisted overnight. One section of tunnel developed cracks in the ceiling that hadn't been there the day before. It was like the ghosts were becoming more powerful, more desperate. I spent my days researching Harrison Industries and my nights talking to the ghosts. I'd learned their signals now. 2 taps for yes, 1 for no. They could move small objects, coal dust, pebbles, water droplets, to write simple messages. They told me their story in fragments. The rushed schedule, the ignored safety warnings, the company's choice to prioritize profit over lives. The explosion that killed them instantly, before they even knew what was happening. And they told me they couldn't rest. Not while their families had never received real justice. Not while the company had never admitted fault. Not while the truth remained buried, just like their bodies. But the really scary part? They were appearing at other places now. I started getting calls from other former Harrison coalfield sites across West Virginia and Kentucky. Security guards reported seeing ghost miners. Equipment operators heard voices in sealed shafts. One facility in Kentucky had to shut down completely after 3 separate incidents in one NIG. Sad. And then the reports started coming from Harrison Industries' corporate offices in Charleston. Executives heard mining sounds in the stairwells. Computers displayed messages they hadn't typed. Papers flew off desks. And Richard Harrison III himself called me, his voice shaking, to report that he'd seen his great-grandfather standing in his office, covered in coal dust, pointing an accusing finger at him. The ghosts weren't just haunting the mine anymore. They were going after the company itself. I drove to Charleston to meet with Richard Harrison III. His office was on the 20th floor of a steel and glass building that probably cost more than every house in my hometown combined. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling as he poured coffee. He'd aged 10 years in a week. "They're everywhere," he said. "In the elevator, in the parking garage. My secretary saw one standing in the conference room, just standing there, staring at her. She quit. They want justice," I told him, "for what your great-grandfather did. That was 1952, I wasn't even born. But you're benefiting from it. Harrison Industries was built on coal money, coal mined by men your company killed through negligence." He slumped in his chair. "What do they want?" I pulled out the list I'd prepared. First, a memorial. A real one, with all 23 names, and a truthful account of what happened. Second, the compensation fund your great-grandfather promised but never delivered, with 25 years of interest. Third, a public admission that the company knew about the safety problems and forced those men to work anyway. That's millions of dollars, the legal liability alone. "Mr. Harrison, your employees are seeing ghosts in your offices. Equipment is failing at your facilities. The mine in Beckley is becoming structurally unsound, and it's only going to get worse." He stared at me. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been talking to them every night, and they're running out of patience." That night, something happened that forced everyone's hand. I was back at Beckley with Bill and Walter down in the tunnels when the ghosts appeared earlier than usual. 10 p.m. instead of 11:15, and there were more of them than I'd ever seen. The temperature dropped to below freezing. Ice formed on the tunnel walls. Our breath came out in white clouds so thick we could barely see through them, and the miners manifested fully, not as shadows or faint figures, but as solid-looking people. 23 men in 1950s mining clothes, standing in the tunnel ahead of us. Their faces were clear now. I could see their expressions, their anger, their sadness, their desperation. My grandfather stood at the front of the group. He looked at me and spoke, his voice echoing through the tunnels. "We can't hold on much longer." His words were clear, impossible to misunderstand. "Either the truth comes out, or we tear this whole mountain down trying." The tunnel shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the support beams groaned under sudden pressure. "Grandpa, we're working on it. 25 years we've waited." His voice rose. 25 years of watching our family struggle, of seeing the company prosper while we rot in the dark. No more waiting. The other miners raised their tools, pickaxes, shovels, hammers. They struck the walls in unison, and the entire mine shuddered. More dust fell. Cracks appeared in the ceiling. Walter pulled at my arm. "Tim, we need to get out of here." But I couldn't move. I was staring at my grandfather's ghost, at the pain and fury in his eyes. "I'll fix this," I said. "I promise. Just give me a few more days." "No." My grandfather pointed at the surface. "Tomorrow. The truth comes out tomorrow. Or we collapse every Harrison building in this state." The miners struck the walls again. A section of tunnel ceiling fell, crashing down 20 feet behind us, blocking our escape route. "Grandpa, please." His expression softened slightly. "You're a good boy, Timothy. Always were. But this isn't your fight to win with patience. Sometimes justice requires force." The temperature dropped even further. The ice on the walls thickened. The miners were drawing energy from somewhere, becoming more powerful, more physical. And then the mine went dark. Our flashlights died. The carbide lamps went out. Complete, total darkness. In that darkness, I felt cold hands on my shoulders. My grandfather's voice whispered in my ear. "You have 1 day. Tell them everything. Make them admit what they did. Or 23 angry ghosts will show them exactly what it feels like to die in the dark, with no one to help them." The lights came back on. The miners were gone. But the damage they'd done remained. The tunnel had new cracks. 2 support beams were bent, and written in frost on the walls, in letters 3 feet high. Tomorrow we barely made it out. Had to climb over the collapsed section. Bill called the structural engineer before we even reached the surface. The mine would have to be closed immediately. Too dangerous for tourists. I called Richard Harrison III at midnight. He answered on the first ring. "They're serious," I told him. "You have until tomorrow night. Memorial, compensation, public admission, all of it. Or they're going to start bringing down buildings. You can't prove that. I don't have to prove it. They'll prove it themselves. Is your office still haunted?" Silence. "How about your house? Are you seeing them at home yet?" His voice was barely a whisper. "They were in my daughter's room tonight, standing around her bed. She's 6 years old. She can't stop crying." "Then you know what you have to do." He hung up. The next day was chaos. Harrison Industries lawyers called me 6 times. The State Mining Commission called. News reporters called after someone leaked the story about the mine closure. Everyone wanted answers. But I only cared about one phone call. At 4 in the afternoon, Richard Harrison III called. "We accept your terms," he said. "All of them. The memorial will be designed and installed within 6 months. The compensation fund will be distributed to surviving family members starting next week, and will issue a public statement admitting company negligence." "Not just a statement," I said. "I want you there, in person, at the mine, reading the names of all 23 men, admitting what your great-grandfather did." "When?" "Tonight, 7 p.m. That's their deadline, tonight or never," he agreed. At 7 p.m., I stood at the entrance to Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine with Richard Harrison III, a small crowd of reporters, and the surviving family members I'd been able to contact on short notice. It was sunset. The light was fading. Perfect timing. Harrison read from the statement his lawyers had prepared. He read the names of all 23 miners. He admitted that his great-grandfather had known about the safety problems. He acknowledged the company's negligence. He announced the memorial and the compensation. His voice shook. He was crying by the time he finished. "I'm sorry," he said, looking at the families. "I know it's too late. I know it doesn't bring them back. But I'm sorry for what happened to your fathers and grandfathers. They deserved better." As he spoke the last words, the temperature around us dropped. Not freezing, just cool, like a spring evening. And everyone saw them. 23 miners, standing in the mine entrance, visible, solid-looking, real. The reporters' cameras flashed. People gasped. One woman fainted. But the miners weren't threatening now. They stood at attention, like soldiers at a ceremony. My grandfather stood at the front. He looked at me and nodded once. Then he looked at the families, at the crowd, at Richard Harrison III, and he saluted. All 23 miners saluted together, a final gesture of respect and farewell. Then, one by one, they faded, like the smoke on the wind. There for a moment, then gone. My grandfather was the last to disappear. Before he faded completely, he smiled at me. I heard his voice one last time, soft and warm. "You did good, son, real good." And he was gone. The memorial was installed 5 months later. Black granite, 10 feet tall, with all 23 names carved in gold letters. Below the names, the inscription read, "These men died March 15, 1952, due to unsafe working conditions and company negligence. We honor their memory and promise to never forget their sacrifice. They deserved better." The compensation fund totaled $8 million with interest. Some families got enough to send kids to college. Others paid off mortgages. A few widows who'd been struggling for decades finally had financial security. Harrison Industries established a mining safety foundation in the miners' names. They fund safety equipment, training programs, and research into preventing mining accidents. It doesn't undo what happened, but it helps. The ghost sightings stopped immediately after that sunset ceremony. The mine's structural problems resolved themselves. Engineers couldn't explain it, but the cracks closed up and the support beams straightened overnight. The temperature returned to normal. The strange sounds ceased. Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine reopened 6 months later with the new memorial as the centerpiece. The tours now include the full, true story of what happened in 1952. Children still visit on school trips, but now they learn about corporate responsibility and worker safety, not just how coal mining worked. I still work as a ranger, still inspect mines, still walk through dark tunnels with my flashlight and my testing equipment. But sometimes, late at night when I'm down in Beckley, I swear I can hear it. Faint and far away, like an echo from another time. Men singing. The old Irish ballad my grandfather loved. In the dark beneath the mountain, where the coal seams run so deep, we dig our way through stone and sorrow, till at last we go to sleep. It doesn't scare me anymore. It sounds peaceful, content, like the sound of men who finally finished their shift and went home. I visit the memorial every year on March 15th. I read all 23 names out loud. I tell them their families are okay now. I tell them they're remembered. I tell them they got their justice. And sometimes, just sometimes, on those quiet anniversary visits, I feel a hand on my shoulder. Gentle, warm. My grandfather's hand, the way he used to rest it there when I was a kid, letting me know he's proud of me, letting me know they can rest now. The mine is quiet these days. The ghosts are at peace. But I learned something important from that summer in 1977. Some debts follow you beyond the grave. Some injustices won't stay buried. And sometimes the dead aren't looking for revenge. They're just looking for someone to tell the truth. My name is Timothy McDonald. I'm a park ranger, and I'm the man who helped 23 ghost miners finally go home. That's my story, every word of it true. You can believe it or not, But if you ever visit Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine in West Virginia, stand quiet at the memorial for a minute. Listen carefully. You might hear them too, the miners who never left. Until, finally, they did. My name is Franklin Whitmore, and I've been a ranger at New River Gorge for 22 years. Before that, I saw things in the war that made me think nothing could scare me anymore. I was wrong. People think being a park ranger is about campfires and lost hikers. Maybe in some places. Here in West Virginia, where the New River cuts through ancient rock like God dragged his fingernail across the earth, my real job is pulling bodies out of the water. Or what's left of them after the rapids are done. I've saved 73 people from drowning. I know every rock, every current, every deadly hydraulic from Fayette Station all the way down to Thurmond. I can look at the water and tell you exactly where it wants to kill you. The river and I understand each other. At least, I thought we did. It started in August of 1965, right at the end of tourist season. 3 different rafting groups came to me within a week, all saying the same strange thing. They'd seen something big moving under the water near Undercut Rock. Real big, they said, bigger than any fish had a right to be. I nodded and smiled and told them the sun plays tricks on you when it hits the rapids just right, makes shadows look like monsters. They seemed relieved. I was lying. See, I'd heard those stories before, back when I first started. Old-timers talking about something that lived in the deepest pools, something that hunted. I'd laughed it off like everyone else. The New River is dangerous enough without making up fairy tales about it. But then people started dying. First was Bobby Chen, 19 years old, local boy. That kid could swim like he was born with gills. He'd won state championships 3 years running. Found him floating face down in water so shallow a toddler could stand up in it. I helped pull him out. That's when I saw the marks. They looked like hickeys at first, perfect circles all over his chest and arms. But they went deep, really deep, like something had tried to suck the meat right off his bones. And his ribs. I've seen car crash victims with better-looking ribs. These were crushed inward, broken from the outside like enormous fingers had squeezed him. The coroner said drowning. I didn't argue. What else could I say? 5 days later, a college girl named Maria Santos. Another strong swimmer. Another impossible drowning. Same marks. Same crushed bones. I started carrying a thermometer in my gear. Started taking water temperatures in the pools where the bodies turned up. Every single one measured 20 degrees colder than it should have been. Fish wouldn't go near those spots. I'd throw in bread and watch minnows scatter away from it like the water itself was poison. That's when Tommy Ashworth came to see me. Tommy had been guiding rafts down the New River since before I started. If he said the sky was green, I'd look up to check. He showed up at my station after dark, wouldn't come inside. Just stood on the porch with his hands shaking. I saw it, Frank, he said. I saw what's killing them. I poured him coffee. He didn't touch it. We were coming through Fayette Station Rapids. Water was perfect, no problems. Then I felt something bump the raft from underneath. Thought maybe we'd hit a log. He stopped, stared at his boots. Logs don't have tentacles. Tommy, I know how it sounds. But I looked over the side and I saw them, Frank. Tentacles thick as telephone poles, just sliding under us like we were nothing. The water turned black around them. Not shadow black. Ink black. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he'd seen a big catfish or a waterlogged tree or anything else. But I thought about Bobby Chen's marks, about the crushed ribs, about water that measured 20 degrees too cold. How many tentacles? I asked. At least 6, maybe more. I didn't stay to count. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about something Mrs. Vaughn had told me years ago. She's our local historian, knows more about this area than anyone alive. She'd mentioned Cherokee legends about a water panther, a monster that lived in the deepest river holes and dragged people down to feed. I'd thought it was just a story. At dawn, I drove to her house. Mrs. Vaughn was 93 years old and sharp as broken glass. She took one look at my face and put the kettle on. "You've seen something," she said. Not a question. I told her everything. The drownings, the marks, Tommy's tentacles. She listened without interrupting, hands folded in her lap like we were discussing the weather. "The Cherokee called it Uktana," she said when I finished. "The water panther. They said it lived in the deepest places, where the sun never reached. Said it could make the water do what it wanted, make it cold, make it flow backward, make it look safe when it was really a trap." "That's just a legend," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Legends come from somewhere, Franklin." She got up and pulled a cardboard box from her closet. Inside were dozens of old photographs and newspaper clippings, some so faded I could barely read them. 1923, she said, tapping one article. 6 drownings in 2 weeks. All experienced swimmers. All in the same stretch of river. She showed me another. 1889, 10 deaths in a month. Another. 1847, 14 deaths. "Every 30 to 40 years, Mrs. Vaughn said quietly. "Something wakes up. Something hunts. Then it goes back to sleep." My mouth went dry. "It's been about 40 years since the last time." She nodded. I left with the box of clippings, drove straight to the ranger station. My partner, David Hoffman, was there filling out paperwork. Dave was 26, fresh out of college, still thought regulations and procedures could solve any problem. "We need to close the river," I said. He looked up at me like I'd suggested we burn down the forest. "Close it? Frank? It's peak seas. On. We'd need approval from— 4 people are dead, Dave. Strong swimmers, dying in calm water." "The coroner said—" "The coroner's wrong." Dave put down his pen. "You got proof?" I didn't. Not the kind that would matter to bureaucrats and politicians. Not the kind you could photograph or put in a report. "Just trust me," I said. "I can't close the river on trust, Frank." That afternoon, I got a call from the Thurman campground. A family had checked in for the week. Mom, Dad, 2 kids under 10. They were planning to swim at Undercut Rock the next day, right where Bobby Chen had died. I grabbed my gear and drove down there fast enough to leave rubber on the road. Found them setting up their tent, kids running around squealing about how excited they were to swim in a real river. The father, a big friendly guy named Michael Peterson, smiled when he saw my uniform. "Officer, perfect timing. Can you recommend the best swimming spots?" "Anywhere but Undercut Rock," I said. His smile faded. "That's where the campground host said to go." The campground host doesn't know what I know. Mrs. Peterson came over, sensing trouble. "Is something wrong?" I opened my mouth to tell them about the deaths, the marks, the cold water, the thing Tommy had seen. But what would I say? That a monster was hunting their children? They'd think I was crazy. They'd complain to my supervisor. They'd go swimming anyway just to prove I was wrong. "Flash flood warning," I lied. "Weather Service says water levels might rise suddenly. Too dangerous for kids." It worked. They decided to hike instead. I drove back to the station feeling sick. How many other families were out there? How many more swimmers were heading to those dark, cold pools? That's when Dave called my radio. "Frank, you need to get to Fayette Station, right now." The way he said it made my hands tight on the wheel. I found Dave standing on the bank, staring at the water. He looked gray. "What happened?" He pointed. I saw it. The river looked normal, fast current, white water, nothing unusual. But Dave kept staring at one spot, his finger trembling. "I was checking the water levels," he said. "Something surfaced, right there, just for a second." "What did you see?" An eye. His voice cracked. "Frank, it was the size of a basketball. It looked right at me. Then it went back under." I'd known Dave for 3 years. He didn't scare easy, didn't imagine things, didn't make up stories. "How deep is the water there?" I asked. 20 feet, maybe 25. If something with eyes that big was swimming in 25 feet of water, the rest of it had to be The river moved wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. The current suddenly flowed backward like someone had put the whole river in reverse, just for 3 or 4 seconds. Then it snapped back to normal. Dave grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" I nodded. My mouth was too dry to speak. Under the surface, something huge glided past. We couldn't see it clearly, just a shadow the size of a car, moving against the current like the water was pulling it along. Then the temperature dropped. Dropped. Like someone had opened a freezer door. Our breath came out in clouds even though it was 80 degrees out. The thing surfaced again. Not all of it. Just enough. We saw a head the size of a Volkswagen, slick and dark, covered in patterns that glowed blue-green in the dim light. The eye, God, that eye, fixed on us with an intelligence that made my stomach flip. It wasn't looking at us like prey. It was looking at us like we were something interesting, something that might become a problem. Then 8 tentacles, each one as thick as my torso, rose out of the water like pythons. They spread out in a circle, each one covered in suckers the size of dinner plates. Dave made a sound I'd never heard a grown man make. The creature sank back down. The water returned to normal temperature. The current flowed right again. We stood there for, maybe 5 minutes before either of us could move. "We're closing the river," Dave finally said, his voice shaking. "I don't care what it takes." We couldn't close the river. Not officially. Dave and I spent 3 hours on the phone with our supervisor, the regional director, even someone from the state tourism board. We told them about the drownings, the cold water, the currents flowing backward. We didn't mention the creature. Nobody believes that part until they see it themselves. The answer was always the same: not enough evidence. Tragic accidents. Unfortunate but natural. Close the river and we'd lose thousands in tourism revenue. Probably lose our jobs too. So we did the only thing we could. We lied. We put up signs at every access point. Dangerous water conditions. High bacteria count. Swimming not advised. We told every camper and rafter we could find that the water wasn't safe. Most of them listened. Most. The creature killed 3 more people in the next 4 days. A college student who ignored our warnings and jumped off the rocks at Undercut. A fisherman who waded out too deep near Thurmond. A kayaker who thought he knew the river better than we did. Each body came out with the same marks. Crushed bones, sucker wounds, eyes wide with terror. The thing was getting bolder, or hungrier, maybe both. I started having nightmares about those tentacles wrapping around children, about families being pulled under one by one while I stood on the bank, powerless to help. Then the drought hit. August turned into the driest month on record. The river dropped 6 feet in 2 weeks. Places that were always underwater suddenly appeared. Islands of rock, exposed sandbars, and something else. Cave entrances. Dave and I were patrolling the newly exposed riverbank near Thurmond when we found the first one. A hole in the limestone big enough to drive a truck through revealed B. With the dropping water level, it went back into darkness, angling down under the river. "Should we call someone?" Dave asked. "Who? And tell them what?" We had flashlights and rope. We had questions that needed answers. We went in. The cave smelled wrong, like brine and copper and something rotten. The walls were smooth, worn by water over thousands of years. Our lights showed places where the rock had been scratched, deep grooves that looked almost deliberate, almost like claw marks. We followed the tunnel down for maybe 50 yards. It opened into a chamber the size of a school gym. That's where we found the skin. It was draped over the rocks like someone had thrown a massive clear tarp. Except it wasn't plastic. It was organic, rubbery, covered in patterns that matched what we'd seen on the creature. And it was huge, 20 feet long at least, with hollow tubes where tentacles had been. "It shed," Dave whispered. "Like a snake." I touched it. The material was thick, tough, covered in circular marks where the suckers had been. This wasn't from some normal animal. This was from something that had never been documented by science. Something that shouldn't exist. We heard water moving deeper in the cave. "We should go," Dave said. I knew he was right. But I also knew we'd never get another chance like this. The drought was rare. The exposed caves wouldn't last. 5 more minutes, I said. We went deeper. The next chamber was smaller, warmer. The walls glistened with moisture. Our lights reflected off something on the floor, hundreds of objects scattered across the stone, bones, human bones. Dave turned and threw up. I couldn't blame him. I wanted to do the same. There were dozens of skeletons, maybe more. Some looked old, ancient even. Others still had tissue attached. I recognized a belt buckle from the 1920s, a class ring from Fayetteville High School, dated 1889. This thing had been hunting people for over a century, maybe longer. That's when we heard it breathing. Not human breathing. Something deeper, slower, like a whale exhaling. It came from a tunnels. We hadn't noticed, one that angled down into absolute darkness. The water in the chamber started to move. Not flowing, just shifting, like something massive was approaching from below, pushing water ahead of it. We ran. Behind us, something scraped against stone, something that sounded wet and heavy and far too close. Our flashlights bounced crazily as we sprinted through the tunnel. Dave slipped on the wet rocks, went down hard. I grabbed him, hauled him up, kept moving. The entrance was just ahead. Sunlight, safety, 20 more yards, 10 yards. Something wrapped around my ankle. I went down face first on the stone. My flashlight skittered away. I twisted around and saw it, a tentacle as thick as my leg, covered in suckers, pulling me backward into the darkness. Dave grabbed my arms. We played tug-of-war with my body, and I was losing. The suckers latched onto my skin through my pants, and it felt like dozens of mouths biting down all at once. "Don't let go," I screamed. Dave braced his feet and pulled. The tentacles squeezed tighter. My ankle was going numb. I could hear more water moving, more tentacles coming. Then Dave did something desperate. He grabbed a rock and smashed it down on the tentacle as hard as he could. The creature made a sound I'll never forget. A shriek that wasn't quite animal and wasn't quite machine. Something between a whale song and nails on a chalkboard. The tentacle released me. We scrambled out of the cave into the sunlight. Behind us, something huge moved in the darkness, but it didn't follow. Maybe it couldn't. Maybe sunlight hurt it. Or maybe it just didn't need to. It knew where we lived. We lay on the rocks, gasping. My ankle was a mess of circular wounds, already turning purple. Dave's hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold his radio. "What now?" he asked. I looked at the cave entrance, at the river, at the forest around us, that suddenly felt less like home and more like enemy territory. "Now," I said, "we figure out how to kill it. We needed help. The kind of help you can't find in a handbook or get from calling your supervisor." I drove to the Cherokee Reservation outside Charleston, asked for Samuel Proudfoot. He was 98 years old, a tribal elder who remembered things most people had forgotten, things they'd tried to forget. He didn't seem surprised when I told him why I'd come. "The water panther," he said, nodding slowly. "My grandfather told me they drove one away in 1889. Took 20 men and cost 3 lives. How did they do it? Fire and sacred stones. The creature fears heat. It lives in cold darkness. And certain minerals disrupt its abilities. Iron oxide, limestone. They painted their bodies with red clay and threw burning torches into its lair." "Did they kill it?" "No. They made it leave. These creatures are ancient, old as the mountains. They can't be killed easily, but they can be hurt. They can be driven away." He gave me a leather pouch filled with red powder. "Clay from the sacred grounds. Mix it with water, mark yourself with it. It won't stop the creature, but it will confuse it, disrupt the way it senses prey." I thanked him, asked if he wanted to come with us. He smiled sadly. "I'm too old to fight monsters, Franklin. That's work for younger men. Just promise me something. If you survive, remember what you learned. Write it down, so the next generation will know." Back at the ranger station, I found Dave and Dr. James Carver from West Virginia University. I'd called Carver earlier, sent him photos of the shed skin. He'd dropped everything to drive down. "This is impossible," he kept saying, examining the photographs. "Cephalopods this size can't exist in fresh water. The osmotic pressure alone would—" "But it does exist," Dave interrupted. "We've seen it. Then it's not a normal cephalopod. This is something adapted, evolved. Maybe from when these mountains were underwater millions of years ago, and it survived somehow in underground river systems." "Can we kill it?" I asked. Carver looked at me. "Theoretically, yes. Cephalopods have centralized nervous systems. Damage the brain, you kill the creature. But actually doing it—" He shook his head. "This thing is massive, intelligent, and it has home field advantage." "The droughts dropped the river to the lowest level in 50 years, I said. "The caves are exposed. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." We spent 2 days preparing, gathered underwater flares, the kind search and rescue teams use, burns at 2,000 degrees, even underwater. Mixed the sacred clay with water, painted our diving suits with it. Dave found an old spear gun in the station basement and sharpened the point to a razor edge. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. The third night we went back to the cave. The entrance looked different in the dark, like a mouth waiting to swallow us. We clicked on our flashlights, checked our gear one last time. "We don't have to do this," Dave said. "We could just wait. Maybe it'll go back to sleep on its own." And how many more people die while we wait? I thought about Bobby Chen, about his mother crying over his body, about the family I'd warned away from Undercut Rock. No, we end this tonight. We went in. The tunnel felt longer in the dark, tighter. Every shadow looked like a tentacle. Every sound of dripping water made us jump. But we made it to the chamber with the bones. That's where we set up our trap. We arranged the underwater flares in a circle, ready to ignite. The plan was simple. Light the flares, use the light and heat to drive the creature up from the deep tunnel into the bone chamber. Then hit it with the spear gun while it was disoriented. Simple, stupid, but it was all we had. Dave lit the first flare. It burst to life with white-hot fire, turning the cave bright as day. We lit the others, one by one, until we stood in a ring of burning light. Then we waited. For a long time, nothing happened, just the hiss of flares and the sound of our breathing. I started to think maybe the creature had gone deeper, found another lair, given up on hunting. Then the water in the tunnel started to glow, not reflected light. Bioluminescence, blue-green patterns moving in the darkness like underwater lightning. It was coming. The temperature dropped so fast our breath turned to fog. The flames on the flares flickered, grew dimmer. The creature was doing something to the air itself, pulling heat out of it. Then it emerged into the chamber. The stories, the glimpses, the shadows under the water. None of it prepared me for seeing the whole thing at once. It was 40 feet long from head to tentacle tips, covered in skin that shifted between black and dark blue. 8 tentacles as thick as tree trunks, each one covered in suckers the size of my head. And the head itself, massive, with eyes that weren't quite like animal eyes. They had too much intelligence, too much awareness. It looked at us, and I felt something push against my mind. Not pain, but pressure, like it was trying to reach inside my thoughts. Images flooded my vision. Bobby Chen drowning, screaming silently underwater. Maria Santos being crushed. The kayaker being dragged down into darkness. All the creature's victims, their final moments, their terror. It was feeding us their fear, trying to paralyze us the same way. I bit down hard on my tongue, tasted blood. The pain helped, pushed back against the mental pressure. I remembered what Samuel Proudfoot said. It could be hurt. It could be driven away. "Dave!" I shouted. "The spear!" But Dave was on his knees, hands over his face, lost in whatever nightmare the creature was showing him. The thing moved forward, tentacles spreading wide. One of them swept through our circle of flares, sending 2 skittering across the floor. The light dimmed. I grabbed a flare and threw it at the creature's head. It hit the skin and stuck there, burning. The creature shrieked, that same horrible sound from before, and pulled back. Where the flare touched, the skin blistered and blackened. It was working. I grabbed another flare, threw it, then another. The creature thrashed, tentacles smashing against the cave walls. One of them caught me across the chest and sent me flying into the rocks. My ribs screamed, couldn't breathe. The creature turned toward me, eyes glowing bright. This time the mental pressure was different. Not fear, but anger. Pure, focused rage. It knew I'd heard it. A tentacle wrapped around my leg, started pulling. I scrambled for anything to hold onto, but the rocks were wet, slippery. I slid toward that massive head, toward a mouth I hadn't noticed before, hidden under the tentacles. A mouth full of teeth like broken glass. Then Dave was there, covered in red clay, the spear gun in his hands. He'd fought through the nightmare, remembered why we'd come. He fired. The spear went into the creature's right eye and kept going, buried itself deep in the soft tissue behind. The shriek this time was different, pain and surprise and something that might have been fear. The tentacle around my leg released. The creature pulled back, one tentacle reaching up to the spear, trying to remove it. "The eggs!" Dave shouted. "Remember the eggs!" We'd almost forgotten. The whole reason this thing was so active, so desperate to hunt and feed. Somewhere deeper in the cave system, it was breeding, creating more of itself. The creature was hurt but not dying. It turned and slithered back down the tunnel, moving fast despite its injury. We had two choices: let it go and risk it healing and returning, or follow it into the deep darkness where it lived. I looked at Dave. He looked at me. We followed. The tunnel sloped down steeply into water that rose to our waists, then our chests. Our remaining flares reflected off wet stone walls, making everything look alien and wrong. The Kriya. Tour's blood, dark blue, almost black, drifted in the water like oil. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Our lights couldn't find the far walls, but they found the eggs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one the size of a basketball, translucent, glowing softly. Inside each egg, we could see something moving. Baby creatures, waiting to be born. The adult was at the far end of the chamber, partially submerged. It had pulled the spear from its eye. The socket leaked dark blood. It watched us with its remaining eye, that same terrible intelligence. It knew what we were going to do. We lit our last flares and started destroying the eggs. They popped like blisters, releasing fluid that smelled like rot and salt. The babies inside writhed and died. We moved through the chamber systematically, burning and crushing everything we could reach. The creature screamed. Not a shriek this time, but something deeper, more anguished. It started moving toward us, but it was hurt, slow. We kept destroying its offspring. When we'd killed as many as we could reach, the creature did something I didn't expect. It gave up. It turned and slithered toward another tunnel, one that led down into even deeper water. Before it disappeared, it looked back at us one more time. The intelligence in that eye was mixed with something else now. Maybe respect, maybe hatred, maybe both. Then it was gone, sinking into the deep places where we couldn't follow. The chamber was quiet except for the hiss of dying flares and the sound of our breathing. "We need to get out," Dave said. "Right now." The walls were trembling. The creature had done something. Maybe knocked loose a support. Maybe used its abilities to shift the water. The cave was collapsing. We ran. Behind us, tons of rock fell, sealing the egg chamber forever. The tunnel we'd entered through was shaking, dropping stones. We had seconds, maybe less. We dove through the opening just as it collapsed. Lay in the shallow water outside, covered in cuts and bruises and creature blood, watching the cave entrance become a pile of rubble. The river flowed around us, normal temperature, normal current. The sun was coming up. We told the authorities that an unusual drought had exposed dangerous cave systems, and we'd investigated to ensure public safety. We said we'd triggered an accidental collapse while checking structural stability. They believed us because the alternative was too crazy to consider. The drownings stopped. The water returned to normal temperature. Fish came back to the deep pools. It was over. Except it wasn't, not really. I still patrol the new river every day, still test water temperatures in the deepest pools, still watch for signs, animals behaving strangely, currents flowing wrong, cold spots that shouldn't exist. Most days, everything is normal. The river is just a river. But sometimes, on foggy mornings when the mist hangs low over the water, I see something moving in the deepest holes, something huge and dark that vanishes when I shine my light on it. I've set up a monitoring system. Temperature sensors in the coldest pools, cameras watching the places where caves might emerge during droughts. I've written everything down, just like Samuel Proudfoot asked me to. Put it all in a locked filing cabinet at the ranger station with a note. Open only if the drownings start again. Because they will start again. Maybe not for 30 years, maybe not for 50. But that thing isn't dead. I heard it, scared it, destroyed its chance to breed. But I didn't kill it. Things like that don't die easy. They retreat. They wait. They remember. Dave quit the Park Service 6 months after that night. Moved to Arizona, someplace dry where the only water comes from a tap. He calls sometimes, asks if I've seen anything. I always tell him no. He knows I'm lying. Dr. Carver published a paper about unusual cephalopod adaptations in freshwater environments. It got rejected by every scientific journal he sent it to. Nobody wanted to believe what we'd found. The shed skin we'd photographed disappeared from the cave, probably swept away when the chamber collapsed, without physical evidence. It was just a story. I'm 57 now. Got 15 more years until retirement, if my knees hold out. I've trained the younger rangers to watch for the signs, though I can't tell them exactly what they're watching for, just that sometimes the river isn't what it seems, that sometimes old stories are trying to warn us about real dangers. Mrs. Vaughn died last winter. Before she went, she gave me another box of newspaper clippings. These went back even further, 1779, 1712, 1681. Always the same pattern. Drownings in deep water, strong swimmers. No explanation. Every generation has to learn the same lesson, she told me on her last day. Some things don't die, they just sleep. And when they wake up, someone has to be ready. I'm ready. Got a storage locker full of underwater flares and iron oxide. Got Samuel Proudfoot's grandson on speed dial. He knows the old stories too. Got temperature sensors and cameras and everything else I'll need. Because last week, during the worst drought we've had since 1965, the water level dropped 6 feet. New cave entrances appeared along the riverbank. And in the deepest pool near Undercut Rock, the water temperature measured 20 degrees colder than it should be. I stood on the bank with my thermometer, watching the dark water, and I felt something watching me back. Something that remembered the spear in its eye, the death of its offspring, the human who'd invaded its home. It's waking up again. And this time, I think it's going to be personal. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and I've been a ranger at Mount Mitchell State Park for 14 years. Before that, I spent 6 years in the Air Force studying weather patterns. I've been struck by lightning twice, survived 3 avalanches, and pulled more lost hikers off this mountain than I can count. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. I believe in what I can see, measure, and predict. But in the winter of 1983, something happened on this mountain that changed everything I thought I knew about the world. Mount Mitchell is the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. It's beautiful up here, but it's also dangerous. The weather can turn from sunny to deadly in under an hour. We get winds that can knock a grown man off his feet. The temperature can drop 40 degrees while you're eating lunch. Cell phones don't work up here. They didn't exist back then anyway. When you're on this mountain, you're on your own. I remember the morning it started. February 14th, Valentine's Day. I was checking the weather station at the summit, about 6,700 feet up. The sky was clear, maybe a few clouds in the distance. Nothing unusual. My instrument showed normal pressure, wind from the northwest at about 15 miles per hour. Everything looked perfect. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind whistling through the rocks. The mountain makes all kinds of sounds, creaking trees, rattling ice, echoes bouncing between the peaks. But this was different. This sounded like someone screaming. I stood still and listened. The sound came and went with the wind gusts. It definitely sounded human. A high-pitched wail, like someone in terrible pain. My first thought was that a hiker had gotten hurt somewhere up above me. I grabbed my radio and called down to the main station. "Base, this is Mendoza. I'm hearing what sounds like screaming near the summit. Anybody reported missing?" Static crackled back at me. "Negative, Carlos. No missing persons. No hiking permits issued for the summit today either. You probably just heard the wind." But I knew the difference between wind and human voices. I'd heard plenty of both over the years. I spent the next 2 hours searching the area around the summit. Found nothing. No tracks, no blood, no gear, no signs anyone had been up there in days. The whole time, every 10 or 15 minutes, I'd hear that scream again. Always when the wind picked up. Always from a slightly different direction. By the time I hiked back down, I'd almost convinced myself it really was just the wind playing tricks on me. Mountains do that sometimes. The rocks and trees can make sounds that seem almost human. Almost. 3 days later, a group of hikers came rushing into the ranger station. There were 5 of them, all experienced climbers from Tennessee. The leader was a guy named Tom Bradford. I'd seen him on the mountain before. Good climber, knew his stuff. But right then, he looked terrified. "Something attacked us," he said, breathing hard. "Up near the summit, something in the wind." I asked him to slow down and explain. The whole group looked shaken up. One woman had a cut on her forehead. Another guy's jacket was torn to pieces. "We were about half a mile from the top," Tom said. Weather was fine, a little windy, but nothing serious. Then suddenly the wind just changed. It started blowing from every direction at once. Not like a normal storm. It felt like it was focused on us. Like it was trying to push us off the mountain. "Wind doesn't work that way," I told him. But even as I said it, I remembered those screams I'd heard. "I know how wind works," Tom shot back. "I've been climbing for 20 years. This wasn't normal wind. It felt alive, and we heard voices in it. People screaming, calling for help, in different languages. One of them sounded like Native American words. The woman with the cut forehead spoke up. Her name was Sarah. It knocked me down 3 times. Each time I tried to stand, the wind would hit me from a different angle, like it was trying to keep me on the ground, like it wanted me to crawl." I wrote up their report and sent it to my supervisor. He told me what I expected. Probably just a freak weather event. Nothing to worry about. Mount Mitchell was famous for sudden wind changes. Case closed. Except it wasn't closed. Because 2 weeks later, we had our first death. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, 28 years old, experienced rock climber from Virginia. She came up with her climbing partner, Steve Morrison, on March 2nd. They had permits, proper gear, everything by the book. The weather forecast looked good. Clear skies, light winds. Steve came back alone. I was the one who found him, stumbling down the trail about 2 miles from the summit. His face was scratched up, his jacket was gone, and he was mumbling the same words over and over. It took her. The wind took her. We got him to the station and gave him hot coffee. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the cup. It took 20 minutes before he could tell us what happened. "We were climbing the north face, he said. Jenny was about 40 feet above me, almost to the ledge. I heard her laughing. She was having a great time. Then the wind started." He stared at his coffee like he was seeing something in it. Something terrible. It came out of nowhere. 1 second calm. The next, hurricane-force gusts. But here's the thing. It was only hitting Jenny. Down where I was, the air was almost still. I could see the wind grabbing her, pulling at her, like invisible hands. She screamed for me to help her, but what could I do? I was 40 feet below her. "Did she fall?" I asked. even though I already knew the answer. No, she didn't fall. She was ripped off the rock. I saw it happen. The wind just took her, threw her against the cliff face, again and again like someone playing with a doll. Then she was gone. By the time I climbed up to where she'd been, the wind had stopped completely, like it had never happened. We found Jenny's body the next day. It took a whole search team, 6 hours of looking. She was wedged in a crack between two rocks about 300 feet below where she'd been climbing. The medical examiner said she'd died from multiple impacts, head trauma, broken bones, internal bleeding. But there were things about her body that didn't make sense. Her clothes were torn in weird patterns, like something had grabbed her and twisted her around. There were pieces of debris, pine needles, dirt, small rocks, embedded in her skin, driven in with so much force they'd gone deep into the tissue. The examiner said it looked like she'd been hit by a sandblaster. And here's the strangest part. When we checked the weather data for that day, the instruments showed calm conditions. Wind speed at the time of the accident, 4 miles per hour. Barely enough to rustle leaves. Steve insisted he'd felt almost no wind where he was, but he'd watched Jennifer get thrown around by gusts he estimated at 60, maybe 70 miles per hour. My supervisor wanted to call it a climbing accident, equipment failure, human error, something normal, but I couldn't let it go. I'd heard those screams. I'd taken that report from Tom Bradford's group. Now a woman was dead, killed by wind that apparently didn't exist. I started doing research. I talked to the old-timers who'd worked in the park for decades. Most of them had stories about weird things happening on the mountain, sounds that didn't match any animal, shadows that moved wrong, feelings of being watched. But one name kept coming up: Robert Whitehorse. Robert was a Cherokee elder who lived in a cabin about 15 miles from the park. He was in his 70s, and people said his family had lived in these mountains for generations, long before the park existed. I drove out to see him on a cold afternoon in mid-March. His cabin was small but well kept. He invited me in and made tea. We sat by his fireplace while I told him everything: the screams, the hiker's report, Jennifer Walsh's death. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The screaming wind has awakened." "The what?" "It's an old story," Robert said. "My grandfather told it to me when I was young. During the Civil War, there was a Cherokee medicine man named Thomas Windwalker. He knew the mountains better than anyone. When Confederate soldiers came looking for Cherokee families hiding in the hills, they captured Windwalker. They tortured him, tried to make him tell where people were hidden. He refused. So they killed him and left his body on the mountain, unburied, no ceremony. Just left him for the animals and the weather." "That's terrible," I said. "But what does it have to do with—" "As he died, Windwalker cursed the mountain. He said his spirit would ride the winds forever, that he would throw down anyone who walked the high places where he'd been murdered. The Cherokees stopped going to the summit after that. We believed him. And for over 100 years there were stories, climbers who felt invisible hands pushing them, hikers who heard voices in the wind, people who died in falls that made no sense. I wanted to tell him I didn't believe in ghosts or curses. But I'd seen Steve Morrison's face. I'd seen what was left of Jennifer Walsh. "How do we stop it?" I asked. Robert looked at me sadly. "I don't know if you can, but if you want to try, you have to understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just wind, it's rage. It's a man who died in agony and has been trapped on that mountain for over a century. He's not going to stop until someone gives him what he wants." "What does he want?" "Peace," Robert said simply. "A proper burial. Recognition of what was done to him. But mostly, I think he just wants someone to remember that he existed." I should have closed the mountain. Looking back, that's obvious. But I had no authority to do that, and my supervisor would never approve it based on a ghost story. So all I could do was post warnings about sudden weather changes and hope people stayed away from the summit. They didn't. On March 18th, another climbing team went up. 2 guys named Mike Rodriguez and Dave Chen. They were both experienced, both careful. They didn't make it back down together. Mike survived. Dave didn't. Mike told me what happened, and I recorded every word. His hands were wrapped in bandages, frostbite from spending a night on the mountain. He'd lost 3 fingers on his left hand. We were about 200 feet from the summit, Mike said. His voice was flat, emotionless. Shock, probably. Perfect weather. We stopped to rest and eat something. Dave was joking about how easy the climb was, how he'd expected more of a challenge. Then the wind hit us. Same as before, I asked. Sudden and strong? Not just strong. Intelligent. I know how crazy that sounds, but I'm telling you, the wind was thinking. It went for Dave first. Created these tornado fingers like thin columns of spinning air. They wrapped around his legs and arms. Dave screamed. He tried to grab onto the rock, but the wind just pulled harder. I grabbed his hand, tried to hold on, but it was like fighting against a machine. The wind pulled him away from me and threw him straight up. I watched him go 20 feet into the air, spinning. Then the wind let go, and he fell. Mike's voice cracked. He took a few seconds to compose himself. I thought that was it for me, too. I was waiting for the wind to come back and throw me off the mountain, but instead it just surrounded me, started getting colder, so cold my hands were burning. The wind kept spinning around me in a circle, trapping me. You there? And I heard voices, dozens of them, all screaming, some in English, some in other languages, and one voice, deeper than the others, speaking words I didn't understand. It sounded angry. So angry. How did you get away? I didn't. The wind kept me there all night. Every time I tried to move, it would push me back, so hard I thought my ribs would break. When the sun came up, the wind just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I climbed down as fast as I could. Didn't look back. Didn't try to find Dave's body. I just ran. We found Dave 3 days later. Like Jennifer Walsh, his body showed signs of massive trauma. But there was something new this time. His face was covered in tiny cuts, thousands of them, like he'd been hit by a blast of sand or ice crystals moving at incredible speed. The medical examiner was baffled. I've never seen injuries like this, she told me. The pattern of damage doesn't match any natural phenomenon. It's like he was attacked by something that understood how to cause maximum pain. That was when I started to really understand what we were dealing with. This wasn't just a ghost randomly lashing out. This was something that had learned how to use its power with precision. Something that was getting stronger. I went back to Robert Whitehorse. This time I brought all my reports, all the evidence I'd collected. He looked through everything carefully. It's worse than I thought, he finally said. Windwalker's spirit is feeding on fear. Each death makes him more powerful. And now he's not just defending his territory, he's hunting. He's learned how to find the terror in people and pull it out of them. There has to be a way to stop him, I said. There is. But you won't like it. He was right. I didn't like it at all. Robert explained that to give Windwalker peace, we needed to find his remains and perform a traditional Cherokee burial ceremony. The problem was that after 120 years of wind and weather, Windwalker's bones would be scattered all across the mountain peaks, and we'd have to do the ceremony at the exact spot where he died, which was somewhere near the summit in Windwalker's territory. So we have to go to the most dangerous part of the mountain, during conditions that will let his spirit manifest and collect bones that could be anywhere? I said. Yes. And if we fail? Then he stays angry, and more people die. Before I could decide what to do, the situation got much worse. On March 24th, a tour group went up to see the view from the summit parking area. 12 people, families with kids, a couple of elderly folks, all just wanting to see the famous view. They never should have been in danger. The parking area was nowhere near the climbing routes where the deaths had happened. But Windwalker didn't care about that anymore. He'd moved beyond defending territory. Now, he just wanted to kill. I was at the ranger station when the call came in. One survivor, a teenager named Lisa, had made it back down and gotten to a phone. She was screaming so hard we could barely understand her. Everyone's dead. The wind killed everyone. It came out of nowhere and it was screaming and... I grabbed my gear and called for backup. By the time we got up there, it was over. 8 people dead, 4 survivors, all badly injured. The scene looked like a bomb had gone off. Cars had been flipped over, trees were snapped in half, bodies were scattered across the parking lot, some of them thrown more than 100 feet from where they'd been standing. But the weather station showed calm conditions. Light winds, clear skies. One of the survivors, an older man named Frank, told me what happened. He'd been taking pictures when the wind hit. It was like standing in front of a jet engine, he said. But the wind wasn't everywhere. It was specific. It went after us one by one. I saw it throw a little girl, she couldn't have been more than 7, against a tree so hard the tree split. I saw it crouch, eat a column of spinning air that picked up a man and carried him to the edge of the overlook and dropped him off. We tried to run to our cars, but the wind kept cutting us off, hurting us. Like sheep, it was playing with us. That's when I knew we were out of time. Windwalker wasn't just angry anymore. He was having fun. The state closed the park the next day. Too little, too late. The media showed up. News vans, reporters, all asking questions nobody could answer. The official story was unusual weather phenomena under investigation. They brought in meteorologists from 3 different universities. None of them could explain what was happening. I knew we had one option left. I called Robert Whitehorse and told him I was ready. He arrived the next morning with another Cherokee elder, a medicine man named Joseph Red Hawk. Joseph was younger than Robert, maybe in his 50s, but he had the kind of presence that made you pay attention when he spoke. "The mountain is very angry," Joseph said after being silent for a long time. "I can feel it from here. The spirit has been alone too long, in pain too long, but there is still a chance to reach him." "What do we need to do?" I asked. "First, we find his bones. Then we bring them to the place of his death. Then we perform the ceremony that should have been done in 1864. We give him back his name, his people, his peace. And if he won't accept peace?" Joseph looked at me with dark, serious eyes. "Then we will have to bind him, force him to rest, but that would be a terrible thing, to trap him in sleep while he still suffers. It would make the mountain a bad place forever." We had to move fast. Another storm front was coming in, this time a real one. We had maybe 2 days of decent weather to search the entire summit area for bones that might not even exist anymore. Robert, Joseph, and I started our search at dawn the next day. The park was empty. They'd evacuated everyone. It was just us and the mountain and the wind. The wind watched us. I could feel it. Every time we found a bone fragment, the wind would pick his sat. TP, circle around us like it was curious or maybe angry. We found pieces of a human skeleton scattered across 3 different peaks. A femur wedged in a rock crack here, a section of ribs there, fingers scattered like seeds. It took us all day, and we still weren't sure we'd found everything. As we worked, Joseph performed small ceremonies at each location, speaking in Cherokee, asking forgiveness for disturbing the remains. The wind would calm a little each time he did this. That gave me hope. Maybe Windwalker could still be reached. We spent that night in the old weather station building near the summit. None of us slept much. The wind howled outside, but it didn't attack. It was waiting. At sunrise, Joseph said it was time. He'd identified the spot where Windwalker had died, a flat area of rock about 50 yards from the summit, marked by a natural stone formation that the Cherokee considered sacred. We carried the bones there in a traditional cloth bundle. The ceremony began just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. Joseph sang in Cherokee, his voice rising and falling with the wind. Robert added his voice. They called to Windwalker by name, told him his people remembered him, told him his sacrifice was honored. At first, nothing happened. Then the wind began to change. It came from all directions at once, converging on our location. But this time it felt different. Not angry, but sad. So unbearably sad. The air grew cold, then warm, then cold again, like the mountain couldn't decide what it was feeling. Then I saw him. He appeared in the wind itself, a shape made of swirling air and mist and dust. Tall, lean, with long hair that flowed in all directions. His face was hard to see, constantly shifting, but I could make out his eyes. They were full of so much pain it hurt to look at them. Joseph continued the ceremony, speaking directly to the spirit now. I couldn't to understand all the words, but I understood the meaning. He was telling Windwalker that his vigil was over, that he could rest, that his people hadn't forgotten him. The spirit resisted. The wind grew violent, pulling at our clothes, trying to push us away. Objects started flying through the air, rocks, branches, pieces of ice. I felt something hit my shoulder, then my leg. The pain was sharp, but I held my ground. "He's been angry too long," Robert shouted over the wind. "He doesn't remember how to be anything else." Joseph's voice grew stronger. He held up the bundle of bones and spoke with absolute authority. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt their power. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a command, a release, a gift. The wind spirit howled. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. Rage and grief and loneliness all mixed together. It was the sound of someone who'd been screaming for 120 years and finally been heard. Then, slowly, the howling changed. It became softer, more like crying than screaming. Joseph carefully placed the bundle of bones in a hollow he'd prepared in the stone. He covered it with soil he'd brought from the Cherokee reservation, then placed a small carved stone on top. He spoke one final time, his voice gentle now. The wind spirit began to dissolve, not violently but gradually, like mist burning away in morning sun. For just a moment, I saw Thomas Windwalker as he must have looked in life. A young man, proud and strong. He looked at Joseph and Robert, and something like gratitude crossed his face. Then he was gone. Just normal wind, the kind that had always blown across these mountains. The three of us stood there for a long time, nobody speaking. The sun was fully up now, and the mountain looked beautiful, peaceful. "Is it over?" I finally asked. "Yes," Joseph said. "He has gone to join his ancestors. The mountain is clean again." The official investigation concluded that the deaths on Mount Mitchell were caused by a series of unusual but natural weather phenomena, microbursts, wind shears, and localized pressure variations. They brought in experts who wrote long reports full of technical language. None of it explained what really happened, but it satisfied the people who needed explanations. The park reopened in May. I stayed on as a ranger, though I requested a transfer to lower elevations. My supervisor approved it without question. Robert Whitehorse and Joseph Redhawk worked with state officials to have the summit area designated as a culturally sensitive site. It's a quiet designation, nothing most visitors would notice, but it means Cherokee elders have the right to perform ceremonies there. They do, once a year, to honor Thomas Windwalker and make sure his spirit stays at rest. I think about those weeks a lot, about Jennifer Walsh and Dave Chen, and those 8 people in the parking lot. About Steve Morrison and Mike Rodriguez, who survived but will never be the same. About a young man who died in agony in 1864 and spent more than a century trapped in rage and loneliness. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my office late at night, I wonder if I should have done more. Closed the mountain sooner, pushed harder for people to listen. But I know that wouldn't have changed anything. Windwalker had been waiting for 120 years. A few more weeks wouldn't have mattered. What matters is that he's at peace now. The mountain feels different. I notice it every time I go up there. The wind is just wind again. It doesn't watch you, doesn't follow you, doesn't whisper in languages you can't understand. But sometimes, on very quiet nights, when the air is perfectly still, I swear I can hear something riding the wind. Not screaming anymore, more like singing. A Cherokee song, old and sad and beautiful. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just the mountain making sounds, the way mountains do. But I don't really believe that, and I don't think I'm supposed to. Some things change you, change the will. You see the world. Before 1983, I thought I understood everything. Weather patterns, natural phenomena, the way the physical world worked. Now I know there are other forces at work. Forces. Ancient debts that need to be paid. Wounds that don't heal until someone acknowledges them. Mount Mitchell is safe now. You can climb it, hike it, enjoy the view from the summit. The weather station still records wind speed and temperature and barometric pressure, all the normal things. But if you go up there, show respect. Remember that the mountain has a history, that people have suffered and died on those peaks. And if the wind picks up suddenly, if you hear something in it that sounds almost like words, don't ignore it. Listen, because sometimes the wind has something important to say. My name is Ezra Coleman, and I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years. I know these mountains better than I know my own face in the mirror. I've pulled 47 lost hikers out of ravines, talked down 3 potential jumpers at Seneca Rocks, and found more missing kids than I care to count. That's what I do. I find the lost ones and bring them home. I never believed in ghost stories. The old-timers would sit around the ranger station talking about hollow children, kids who go missing in the deep woods and come back wrong somehow, empty inside. I'd just smile and nod, figuring it was mountain people being mountain people, you know? Making up stories to explain the random cruelty of nature. That was before October 1978, before the Morrisons. It started on a Wednesday morning when the call came in about a family 3 days overdue from a camping trip. Mike and Janet Morrison, along with their 7-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan. They'd gone into the Cranberry Wilderness on Sunday and should have been back Monday night. By Wednesday, folks were worried. I took the call because that's what I do, families with kids. That's my specialty. I've got a 98% success rate. The 2% still keeps me up at night, but we don't talk about that. I drove out to their last known campsite with my partner, Pete Hutchins, riding shotgun. Pete's good people. Been with the Forest Service for 8 years. He handles the equipment while I read the signs. Probably just car trouble, Pete said as we bounced along the dirt road. Or they decided to stay an extra couple days. I nodded, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it then. Just a feeling in my gut. Like when you know a storm's coming before the sky turns dark. We found their campsite around noon. The moment I stepped out of the truck, I knew something was very wrong. The site was too perfect. Too organized. The tent was still up, but the sleeping bags inside were folded like they do in department stores. Crisp corners, not a wrinkle. Food sat on the camp table, rotting in the October sun, but it hadn't been touched by animals. In these woods, raccoons will tear apart anything that smells like food. But this stuff just sat there, covered in flies, completely undisturbed. That's weird, Pete said, pointing. The family's car keys were hanging from a tree branch. Not tossed there, hanging. Like someone had carefully placed them on a branch 8 feet off the ground. You'd need a ladder to reach that high. Maybe they're playing a game with the kids, Pete suggested, but his voice was uncertain. I didn't answer. I was looking at the ground near the tent. There were footprints, small ones, child-sized, leading away from the camp in a perfectly straight line. Emma and Ethan, I figured. But something about those prints made my skin crawl. They were too deep, way too deep for 7-year-olds, and the stride length was all wrong. 4 feet between each print, maybe more. No child walks like that. We need to follow these, I said. Pete got the gear while I marked the trail. The prints led east toward Shaver's Fork Valley. That's rough country, steep terrain, lots of old mine shafts from the 1920s. Not the kind of place you'd take young kids. We followed the trail for an hour. The forest got quieter with every step. At first, I didn't notice it. Then Pete stopped walking. "You hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Nothing." He was right. No bird calls, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had stopped. The forest was completely silent, like someone had hit a mute button on the whole world. My radio crackled. I grabbed it, hoping for an update from base. Static, just static. But underneath it, was that laughter? high-pitched, like children giggling. Bass. "This is Coleman. Do you copy?" I said into the radio. More static. Then, very faint, I heard singing. A nursery rhyme, but the words were backwards. The melody was right, but everything else was wrong. I turned the radio off. My hands were shaking. "Let's keep moving," I said. We found Mike Morrison 20 minutes later. He was standing in the creek bed, actually standing, even though he was dead. The water flowed around his legs, which were planted firmly on the rocky bottom. His eyes were wide open, staring downstream at something I couldn't see. His face was pale, lips blue. Drowned, clearly. But when Pete and I pulled him out and I checked him over, there was no water in his lungs. None. I've seen enough drowning victims to know what that looks like, and this wasn't it. This man had died standing up in the middle of a creek, without a drop of water entering his body. "How is that possible?" Pete whispered. I didn't have an answer. The temperature dropped. I mean, really dropped. Like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath came out in white clouds, even though it was a warm October day, maybe 70 degrees when we'd started hiking. Now I could see frost forming on the nearby trees. My compass started spinning. Not just drifting, spinning like a top, the needle whipping around so fast it became a blur. "Coleman," Pete said, his voice tight. "We need to call this in. We need backup." I grabbed my radio again. Dead. Completely dead, even though I'd charged the batteries that morning. That's when I heard the voice. "Ranger, can you help us?" A child's voice. A little girl, coming from deeper in the woods. "Please, we're scared. We can't find our mommy." A boy's voice now, from the same direction. I looked at Pete. His face had gone pale. "That's them," I said. "That's Emma and Ethan." I'd studied the missing persons report carefully. I'd listened to the recording of the parents describing their kids' voices. I knew what they sounded like, and these were definitely them. But something was wrong. The voices were coming from too far away, too deep in the forest. And they sounded flat, like someone reading from a script. "Help us, Ranger Coleman," the girl's voice called again. I hadn't told them my name. How did they know my name? We followed the voices for another mile. The forest got darker, even though it was only early afternoon. The trees seemed to lean in closer, like they were trying to block out the sun. That wrong feeling in my gut had turned into full-blown dread, but I kept walking. Those kids needed help. We came to an old mining camp. Most of the buildings had collapsed years ago, just piles of rotted wood and rusted metal. But one cabin stood intact, and smoke was rising from its chimney. Fresh smoke. Someone was inside. I approached carefully, one hand on my pistol. Through the dirty window I saw movement, 2 small figures, child-sized. They were standing perfectly still, watching me. I circled around to get a better angle. The figures moved to follow me, always keeping me in sight. But when I looked down at the mud around the cabin, I saw something impossible. There were footprints. Small footprints, showing where the children had walked. But the prints showed they'd been standing on opposite sides of the cabin at the same time I'd seen them both in the window, like they were in 2 places at once. "Pete," I said quietly, "stay here. Cover me." I opened the cabin door. The inside was warm, too warm, and it was lived in. Fresh food on the table, clean blankets on the cots, children's drawings covering every inch of the walls. I stepped closer to look at the drawings. They were done in crayon, the kind of pictures kids make. But the content made my stomach turn. They showed families, mothers, fathers, children. But the people in the drawings were hollow, literally hollow, like paper dolls with the middles cut out, and around them, other figures danced and celebrated. The drawings had capped lines in a child's handwriting. The hollowing, making room. Time to go home. My watch beeped. I looked down at it. The second hand was moving backwards. I looked out the window. The sun was setting in the north where the sun never sets. It was defying the laws of nature right in front of my eyes. And there, in the mud outside the cabin, were my own boot prints, leading to places I hadn't walked yet. My footprints from the future, already pressed into the ground. "Coleman!" Pete's voice panicked. "The kids! I see them!" I ran outside. Pete was pointing at the tree line. 2 children stood there, holding hands. They were dressed in dirty clothes, faces smudged with mud. Emma and Ethan Morrison, exactly matching their photographs. But they were wrong. Their heads tilted at angles that necks shouldn't bend. Their eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the whole eye, like they'd been filled in with ink. "Help us, Ranger Coleman," they said in perfect unison. "We want to go home." They took a step forward, moving in perfect sync like mirror images of each other. That's when the sun finished setting at 2 in the afternoon, and true darkness fell over the forest. Night came all at once, like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. Pete and I ran back to the cabin and barricaded the door with everything we could find. Outside, we could hear them, the children, calling for help. But now there were more voices, 6, maybe 7 kids, all crying and begging to be saved. "Ranger Coleman," they sang together. "Don't you want to help us? Don't you want to save the children?" I tried my radio again. Static, but this time I heard Pete's voice coming through it, which was impossible because Pete was standing right next to me. "Coleman, can you hear me?" Radio Pete said. "I'm at the cabin. Where are you?" Real Pete stared at the radio, his face white as snow. "That's not me," he whispered. "Coleman," Radio Pete continued. "There's someone else here. Someone small. They say they're the first one taken. They say—" The radio died with a squat, bill of feedback. The voices outside changed. They stopped calling for help. Instead, they started talking about me. "Ezra Coleman," a girl's voice said. "Born March 15, 1940, in Charleston. Mother's name was Mary. She used to make you blueberry pancakes every Sunday." I felt my blood turn to ice. Nobody knew that. Nobody alive, anyway. "Your daughter's name was Sarah," a boy's voice added. "She died 5 years ago. Car accident on Route 92. She was wearing her blue dress, the one you bought her for her birthday." "Shut up," I said through clenched teeth. "You weren't there," the voices continued, now speaking in chorus. "You were here, in the forest, saving other people's children. But you couldn't save your own." "Shut up!" Pete grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to them. Whatever they are, they're trying to get inside your head." But they were right. Sarah had died while I was out on a search and rescue. I'd been saving someone else's kid while mine was dying on the side of the road. That guilt had been eating at me for 5 years. "We can bring her back," the children said. "We can make you hollow, and she can live inside you. Would you like that, Ranger Coleman? Would you like to be with your daughter again?" Something scratched at the door. Not hands, something else. Something with too many fingers. Pete's radio suddenly crackled to life. "Pete? Coleman? This is Hutchins' family. We're looking for you." Wait. Pete Hutchins was already here, standing next to me. Who was on the radio? "Disregard that," Pete said quickly. "That's not my family. I'm not married. I don't have a family." The scratching at the door got louder. Wood began to splinter. Through the gaps in the boards covering the window, I saw them. Not just Emma and Ethan anymore. There were more children now, at least a dozen, maybe more. Different ages, different eras of clothing. Some wore overalls from the 1920s, as others wore 1950s dresses. A few had modern clothes from the 70s. All of them had those empty black eyes. They moved wrong, their joints bent backwards, their heads rotated too far. They lifted a fallen tree like it weighed nothing, carrying it toward the cabin like a battering ram. "We need to run," Pete said. "There's a back window." "No," I said. Something was clicking in my mind. Look at them. Really look at them. The children's clothes were all old. Decades old. These weren't the Morrison twins and their friends. These were children from different times, all gathered here. This had happened before, many times before. "There's an old mine behind the cabin," I said, remembering the map. "The Thorn Mine. It collapsed in 1923. There was a disaster," Pete finished. "I remember reading about it. 12 children died." 12 children. I counted the figures outside. 14. Emma and Ethan Morrison, made 14. The front door exploded inward. The children poured in like water, flowing over each other, their limbs tangling and untangling. Up close I could see their true forms beneath the child shapes, withered, rotted, mouths that opened too wide, showing nothing but darkness inside. "Time to be hollow," they said. Pete grabbed my arm and we crashed through the back window. Glass cut my face. We hit the ground running, sprinting toward the old mine shaft. Behind us, the children didn't run. They glided, their feet not quite touching the ground. And they were fast. So fast. We reached the mine entrance, a gaping black hole in the side of the mountain. The wooden supports were ancient, rotted through, but the shaft itself had been recently excavated. Fresh dirt piled around the entrance. Someone, or something, had been digging. "In here!" Pete yelled. "Are you crazy? We'll be trapped!" But the children were almost on us. We had no choice. We plunged into the darkness of the mine. The mine shaft went deeper than it should have, way deeper. We ran blind, hands stretched out in front of us, feeling our way along the wet stone walls. Behind us, the children's voices echoed, but they didn't follow. They just laughed and sang their backwards nursery rhymes. We stumbled into a wider chamber. Pete had a lighter. He flicked it on and we both gasped. The walls were covered in names, hundreds of names carved into the stone, dates next to each one, going back to 1923. The most recent said, Emma Morrison, Ethan Morrison, October 1978. "They're keeping track," I whispered. "All the people they've taken." At the far end of the chamber, an old man sat waiting. He was wrapped in blankets, his weathered face lit by a small fire. He looked at us with eyes that had seen too much. "You must be the ranger," he said. His voice was rough, like rocks grinding together. "I'm Joseph Running Horse. Your wife called me." "My wife?" I hadn't seen or thought about my ex-wife in 2 years. "She said you needed help with something impossible." He gestured around the chamber. "This is the Thorn Mine. You know about what happened here?" 12 children died in a cave-in, Pete said. 1923. "No," Joseph shook his head. "That's what people say. The truth is worse. The children were murdered, sacrificed. The mine foreman, William Thorne, believed the mountain demanded blood to keep the tunnels safe. So he brought his workers' children down here and killed them. 12 innocent kids murdered in the dark." I felt sick. "And their spirits are trapped here, angry, hungry. They've been luring people to this place for 55 years, taking their bodies, using them to walk in the world above." He looked at me with sad eyes. "Your Morrison family. The parents are already gone. The children's spirits were pushed out, and the old ones moved in. Emma and Ethan Morrison don't exist anymore. They're just shells, hollow on the inside, filled with the angry ghosts of murdered kids. There has to be a way to stop this," I said, "to free them." Joseph reached into his blanket and pulled out a bundle of sage, some tobacco, and a piece of paper covered in names. "There is a ritual, Cherokee tradition, but it has to happen at the thin time, the exact moment between day and night when the worlds overlap. And someone has to speak the names of all the murdered children to release their spirits." "How long until the thin time?" Pete asked. 1 hour, maybe less." Joseph looked at the mine entrance. "But first they'll come for you. They'll try to make you hollow too. They need more bodies, more shells to fill." As if on cue, the children appeared at the chamber entrance. All 14 of them, moving as one. Their black eyes reflected the firelight. "We don't want to hurt you, Ranger Coleman," they said in their chorus voice. "We just want to go home. Don't you understand? We've been trapped here for so long. We just want our families back." "You can't have them," I said, stepping forward. "Those bodies belong to Emma and Ethan Morrison, real children with real lives. You don't get to steal that." The children's faces twisted with rage. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the stone walls like spider webs. "You can't stop us," they hissed. "We are Legion. We are the Hollow. We are forever." They rushed forward. Pete stepped in front of me. "Do the ritual," he shouted. I'll hold them off. Pete, no. But he was already moving, grabbing one of the old mining timbers and swinging it like a club. It passed through the children like they were smoke, but it disrupted them, made them scatter. I grabbed the sage from Joseph and lit it with his fire. The smoke rose thick and pungent. Joseph began to chant in Cherokee, his voice steady and strong despite his age. The children turned toward us. I saw Pete go down under a wave of small bodies. He screamed, not in pain, but in terror. I could see something being pulled out of him, something bright and alive, being dragged away. "The names!" Joseph shouted, thrusting the paper at me. "Read the names!" My hands shook as I looked at the list, 12 names of children murdered in 1923. I started reading, my voice cracking with emotion. Tommy Brennan, Sarah Kowalski, Michael. The children shrieked. The sound was like metal scraping on metal, like glass breaking, like every terrible sound in the world combined into one. I kept reading. Michael Chen, Patricia O'Brien. Something rose from the collapsed mine shaft, a massive figure made of coal dust and shadow. It wore an old mining helmet, and its face was the face of a man rotted by decades underground. William Thorne, the murderer, the one who'd started all this. "You cannot banish me," his voice boomed, shaking rocks loose from the ceiling. "I am the mountain. I am the hollow. I have fed on children's souls for 55 years. I read faster. David Murphy, Elizabeth Thorne. "My own daughter," Thorne roared. "Yes, I killed her first, to show my devotion to the mountain." The children were changing, splitting apart, each one becoming individual again, their black eyes clearing to show different colors: brown, blue, green, hazel. They looked confused, like they'd just woken up from a long nightmare. James Thatcher, Ruth Kowalski, Thomas O'Malley. I was almost done. Thorne lunged for me. His massive coal dust hands reached for my throat. But the children, the real spirits of the murdered children, turned on him. They swarmed him like angry bees, their small forms bright now, no longer hollow. Henry Wu, Margaret Brennan. 2 more names. George Thorne, Mary Sullivan. The last name, the 12th child. "I release you," I said. "I release you all." Light exploded through the mine shaft. William Thorne screamed as the children tore into him, their tiny hands pulling him apart piece by piece. The mountain shook. The ceiling began to collapse. Joseph grabbed me. "Run!" We dragged Pete between us and ran for the entrance as tons of rock came crashing down. Behind us, I heard Thorne's final scream, cut off by the thunder of falling stone. The mine shaft sealed itself with a rumble that sounded like the earth itself was satisfied. We burst out into daylight, real daylight, warm October afternoon sun. The hollow was gone. The darkness had lifted. And standing there, confused and scared but alive, were the Morrison family. All 4 of them. Mike and Janet holding their twins close. What happened?" Janet Morrison asked, looking around. "Where are we?" They didn't remember. Any of it. The past 3 days had been erased from their minds. I looked at Pete. He was pale, shaking, but alive. "Did we—" he started. "Yeah," I said. "We did. The official report said there never was a search. The Morrison family never went missing. According to all records, they'd spent a nice weekend at home and never went camping at all. Reality had folded back on itself, rewriting what happened. But I remembered. Pete remembered. And Joseph Running Horse remembered, though he vanished back to his Cherokee community before I could thank him properly. I found things in my pockets that shouldn't have been there. Small stones carved with Cherokee symbols of protection. Spirit stones. Proof that it had really happened, even if the world said otherwise. I marked that whole section of the Cranberry Wilderness as dangerous territory, filed reports about unstable mine shafts and potential cave-ins, made sure families would stay away. The Forest Service put up warning signs and the area was closed to camping. I thought it was over. Then, 1 month later, I got a call at the ranger station. Monongahela Forest Service, this is Coleman. Ranger Coleman? A man's voice, stressed and worried. My name is David Chen. My family, we went camping near Shaver's Fork, and now we can't find our kids. A boy and a girl, twins, age 7. We're so worried. Can you help us? My blood ran cold. Twins, age 7, just like the Morrisons. Sir? Where exactly did you camp? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Near some old mining ruins. There was a cabin. I heard it then, just barely underneath his voice. An echo, like he was speaking from somewhere far away, somewhere hollow. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the map on my wall where I'd marked the closed area. The red X over the Thorn mine site. Pete walked in with coffee. He saw my face and stopped. What is it? He asked. I wanted to say nothing. I wanted to believe it was over. But I'd been a ranger for 16 years, and I knew these mountains. I knew that some things never really die. They just wait. Get your gear, I said quietly. We've got a family to find. As Pete left to prepare, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the Cherokee spirit stones Joseph had given me. They were warm to the touch, warmer than they should be. Outside my window, the October sun was setting, but it was setting in the wrong direction. In the north, where the sun never sets.